Over the course of the winter, I did a fair amount of riding in mud and ice, and because of that, I went through a set of rear brake pads in under 8 hours. Lucky for me, brake pads and rotors aren't all that expensive and they're pretty easy to replace. Before we talk about what kind of brake pads you might need, let's discuss how they work. Now, I could get into all kinds of specifics and bore you with things like chamfers and coefficient of frictions and a bunch of technical stuff, but I'm going to stick to the basics, because for a rider that rides at my speed, give or take, pretty much any type of brake pad will do. Brakes work on the principle of friction, and there are two types of friction, adhering and abrasive friction. When the pads rub on the rotor, they leave a small amount of material on them, which allows them to stick together better and give you more braking power. Abrasive friction is like sandpaper and will quickly wear your parts out. Higher end brake pads use more adherent friction, and that means less wear on your rotors. Now, the material used on brake pads has evolved over the years. I'm sure we're all familiar with brake fade, so heat dissipation is a must. We actually used to use asbestos in brake pads because of its ability to dissipate heat really well. An alternative to asbestos, organic brake pads. These use materials like Kevlar, fiber, resin, and all these different compounds that can withstand heat in a relatively inexpensive way of manufacturing them. They will wear quicker than others, but they're priced right. Semi-metallic brake pads can create a little more dust than higher-end brake pads. They're also made with more friction materials that are harder than most, so they may be more aggressive and wear your brake rotors out quicker. Sintered metal brake pads are pretty popular, and they do have the ability to be less affected by heat buildup, although the heavier you are on the brakes, the more heat generated. These sintered brake pads don't fade as much as ones like organic brake pads. Ceramic brake pads are priced higher, and the brake pads generally handle extremely high temperatures with little fade, allowing them to recover quickly and cause less damage to the rotors. The slots in the brake pads are not only wear indicators, but more importantly, they allow the buildup of dust to escape. Now, when it comes to brake rotors, you can imagine that heat dissipation is again the name of the game. Different rotors have different configurations and slots in them to dissipate heat efficiently. If your rotors get too hot, not only do your brakes fade, but you can cause rotor warp, which means an uneven surface for the brake pads to grab, reducing your braking even more. There are all kinds of rotors at a different price point. Choose one to fit your budget. But remember when you're installing it to use a scratch pad on the surface, so there's a small amount of friction for the pads to grab right out of the gate. When deciding whether or not to change your rotors, your owner's manual will have specifications on how thin the rotor should get before you change it, so use the set of calipers in your manual as a guide before you decide to change your rotor out. Also, look for things like cupping on the edge or other signs of wear. All in all, doing the brakes on your bike is a relatively inexpensive job, and certainly not one that you should be intimidated by. I'll put some links below to some brake pads, some brake discs, things like that to get you guys started. I hope you liked the video. I hope it helped you in some way. Stay safe, ride safe, and we'll see you guys in the next video.